Here on Wham Baam Dashcam, we've shown you over 1,000 dashcam videos sent in by our fans, and we serve up 20 new ones every week. Today we're showcasing some of the craziest clips we've ever featured, so buckle up for Wham Baam Dashcam's Worst Drivers of Arizona, Volume 1. Alex was 5 minutes from home on his way back from volleyball practice. An oncoming driver turned in front of Alex. Even though he swerved and braked, he couldn't avoid a collision. The impact caused his dashcam to detach from the windshield. Thankfully, Alex sustained no serious injuries, and he immediately called 911. The other car spun completely around, impacting Alex's Toyota Venza from the rear as well. Both vehicles were totaled in the wreck. The other driver was cited for failing to yield, and insurance paid Alex 95% of what he'd paid for the car a year earlier. This submitter was on his way to school on a windy day when a sudden gust knocked a string trimmer out of the trailer he was following down the highway. The Mint Miata's manipulator made a marvelous maneuver and managed to maintain its matchless magnificence. Jonathan was leaving work when the driver of a smart car blew through a yield sign. The smart car nearly sideswiped Jonathan's Ford Expedition, stopping at the same time he did to avoid a collision. He told us this turn is always bad, and he has lots of videos like this, but this is the closest call he's had so far. Dell was driving home from work when the driver of an SUV passed him on the shoulder before sideswiping his Chevy Impala. If we rewind the footage, it looks like Dell suddenly slowed down before this happened, although he didn't tell us why. He also swerved onto the shoulder himself as the SUV began to pass him. Dell pulled over, but the SUV driver didn't, making this a hit and run. Dell called the police and gave them the other driver's license plate number. In total, the collision did over $4,000 in damage to Dell's car. It seems like Jonathan keeps encountering drivers who don't want to wait for their turn. He was headed home after another graveyard shift when a rather large vehicle ran a red light right in front of him. Good thing Jonathan was paying attention. The vehicle that ran a red light was a city bus. Jonathan turned and followed it so he could report the driver to the city. When he asked the driver if he realized he'd run a red light, he just ignored Jonathan and refused to respond. Greg was driving on a cold evening after snow had melted, leaving black ice behind in some places. As he waited at a traffic light, the driver of a Jeep Liberty lost control while turning and smashed into Greg's Toyota Prius. The Jeep was relatively undamaged, while Greg's Prius needed a new headlight and front bumper cover. Thankfully, nobody was injured. The Jeep driver accepted fault right away, and his insurance provider paid to repair Greg's car. Mike was driving along in his Jaguar I-Pace when an SUV suddenly flew past him at an insane speed. Mike estimates the SUV driver must have been going double the speed limit as they swerved around traffic. Sad, not good. Greg was on his way to work when he noticed a Honda driving up the center turn lane next to him. Suddenly, the driver of a Mitsubishi SUV decided to get in the turn lane right in front of the Honda. The Honda driver nearly rear-ended the Mitsubishi, barely avoiding a collision as both drivers swerved just in time. Greg was driving to work in heavy traffic, and the sun was causing a lot of glare for drivers on his side of the road. Suddenly, an SUV turned from his lane into the left lane, cutting off another SUV. The SUVs collided. The heavy traffic made it impossible for Greg to stop, but he did tell us both drivers pulled over, hopefully to exchange information. Victor watched a pickup driver merge in front of an SUV without signaling or checking their blind spot. The SUV driver swerved around the pickup rather than sideswiping it, nearly causing a collision with Victor. Thankfully, he was able to brake fast enough to avoid any contact. Victor told us he was surprised that no road rage followed and everyone went their separate ways. Jared was driving to work when he slowed down for a traffic light that was about to turn red. Suddenly, the driver of a black Kia to his right ran the red light and hit a sedan that was in the intersection. Jared said the Kia driver jumped out to check on her kids in the back seat. Thankfully, everybody was okay. Jared gave copies of his dashcam footage to both drivers and the police before continuing on his way to work. Later, when the cops called Jared for some more information, the officer told him the husband of the Kia driver had been very aggressive with the police and insisted that her light had been green. He got very angry when the officer told him he'd seen dashcam video proving her light had been red, and he only backed down when threatened with arrest. Jared told us he wishes he'd stuck around to watch. Dina was waiting for traffic on the other side of an intersection to pull forward before proceeding through a green light. Suddenly, an oncoming driver turned across traffic, cutting in front of a pickup truck. I bet the driver didn't expect the cop behind them to dish up a helping of instant justice after she nearly caused a collision. Dina told us watching our channels has helped her avoid multiple collisions. Thanks, Dina. Harrison watched the driver of an RV make a U-turn across traffic moving at highway speeds. He had to slow down from 65 to only 15 miles per hour in a matter of seconds to avoid a collision. Thankfully, Harrison and his Lexus IS 300 both survived the rapid deceleration, but I'm not sure if the same can be said for his pants. This highway collision is super chaotic, and it took us a few times watching it before we figured out what was going on. Keep your eye on a gold SUV that triggers the entire incident after making an unsafe lane change. We honestly can't tell how many vehicles were involved, but the driver of the gold SUV evidently fled the scene. Enoch called 911 to report the incident and offer police his dashcam footage, but he hasn't heard from them. He wanted to shout out his son Dustin for introducing him to our channel. Thanks, Dustin. Jared's wife Bryn merged right as her lane was ending soon when she noticed a red convertible Mustang pull out in front of a work truck, and the driver had to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. The driver of the work truck did not appreciate this move and tried to use a turn lane to pass the Mustang illegally. When that failed, they slowed down at the next light to yell at the Mustang driver before driving off. John was also driving through a construction area where the entire left lane was being closed off by pylons. He watched another driver wait too long to merge before hitting several of them, damaging her car. The impacts flattened a few pylons and destroyed the car's side view mirror, but the driver just kept going. Maybe she figured she didn't need that mirror anyway. Jared was on his way to a wedding in California with his family when a silver Nissan flew past him in the travel lane. Jared told us he was going 85 in a 75, and he estimates the Nissan speed at around 100 miles per hour. Fewer than 5 minutes later, Jared passed the same Nissan, but this time it was pulled over on the shoulder with an Arizona Department of Public Safety SUV parked right behind it with the party lights on. Jared had just 2 words for that Nissan driver: instant justice. John was driving along when a side-by-side hidden by the glare of the sun suddenly turned out into the road in front of him. John was briefly forced off the road to avoid slamming into the side-by-side on the 45-mile-per-hour road. He wanted to shout out his son Grayson, who loves watching Wham Baam Dashcam ever since their family got a Model 3 Performance. Mateo was on his way to a local pharmacy when a minivan turned onto the road in front of him. He slammed on the brakes and laid on the horn, but he couldn't avoid rear-ending the other vehicle. The impact totaled Mateo's Acura TL when the radiator was destroyed. When he called the police, they told him the Tucson police only respond to collisions involving injuries or hit and runs. He got the minivan driver's information before they left. A few days later, he found out the other driver's insurance provider had found him at fault since it was a rear-end collision. Thankfully, his dash cam revealed the truth. He told us the second his insurance provider sent his footage to the other insurance company, the debate was over. They accepted responsibility, totaled his Acura, and sent him a check that he used to buy a replacement. Mateo still misses his Acura, which he'd had since he was 16, but his dash cam really saved the day. Rose was driving her Chevy Blazer when another driver rolled through a stop sign in front of her. Only by braking hard was Rose able to avoid T-boning the other SUV. She told us she pulled into a nearby parking lot to calm her nerves before she continued. Kai was headed home from college one afternoon when traffic ahead of him on the on-ramp to I-10 stopped abruptly, forcing him to slam on his brakes. Kai's Chevy S10 was suddenly rear-ended by a Ford F-150 being driven by one of his classmates. Kai told us the F-150 hit him at 60 miles per hour, destroying a taillight and damaging the rear bumper. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured, and the F-150 driver admitted fault. Neither of them notified first responders, and Kai wanted to shout out his classmate for being a good sport and an awesome friend. Rose was headed to lunch when a pickup truck turned way too wide, nearly hitting her Chevy Blazer. Thankfully, Rose's quick reaction saved her SUV from being struck by the poorly driven pickup. Dennis was driving down an Arizona highway at about 65 miles per hour when he was suddenly faced with a minivan headed toward him in his own lane. The minivan driver had been trying to pass a semi-truck when they ran out of room and took to the shoulder to avoid a head-on collision with Dennis's Toyota Tacoma. Instead, the minivan ran into the guardrail, ripping open the side panels. Dennis also lost control before colliding with the guardrail, causing $2,500 in damage. Dennis mentioned that the minivan driver should have been more careful considering they had 2 passengers on board at the time. Jared was about to pull into an intersection after his light turned green and the driver of the pickup across from him was beginning to as well. It's a good thing they both were paying attention. A Buick driver ran their red light, swerving around the pickup truck and missing it by inches. Jared told us he eventually caught up to the Buick and the driver didn't seem the least bit concerned. Pete and Jen spotted a white Mazda 3 suddenly lose control and spin across a busy highway at 75 miles per hour. The Mazda came way too close to a Nissan Altima and a semi-truck before ending up facing the right direction on the shoulder. Yikes! Thankfully, no collisions occurred.
Wham! Bam, we got a Patreon, man. Please support the show.